Welcome to Train Signal, and this is the next video in our Advanced SQL Server 2008 Database Administration Training course. In this video, the focus is log shipping as part of the set of videos on high availability. So we'll be looking at log shipping and what it has to offer as far as making sure you have data available to your users in the event of system crashes or failures, system upgrades, and other types of activities in your server environment that could prohibit the accessibility of your primary server. So in this video, here's the things we want to look at. First of all, just a high-level overview of what is log shipping. What does it have to offer? Where is it supported? It doesn't run in every single variation or edition of SQL Server. Then we'll look at some of the components. There's basically three primary server types, I should say, that you'll find in a log shipping paradigm. And you can actually have multiple copies of these different types, but there's three main types. And then there's certain jobs that are going to run on those servers. We want to look at that. So we'll look at the servers, we'll look at the jobs that run on those servers, and then we want to go through the process of actually setting up log shipping. Now I'm doing it once again in a virtual environment, so I can in some ways maybe cheat a little, but not necessarily, because the main thing I'm doing here that is a very big help is I can copy my logs directly from my primary database to my secondary database. Next, we'll look at the process of setting up log shipping. So I'll actually walk you through the steps that you'll need to perform to enable log shipping. After you've got it up and running, the other thing is, okay, I've got my logs shipped to my secondary server where I need them to be in the event of a failure. Now what do I need to do to start using that secondary server? That's a process known as failover. We'll walk you through switching over to the secondary server known as failover. And with anything under SQL Server, there's a bunch of tables that are needed by the processes themselves to administer the process. Same thing is true for log shipping. There are tables under the MSDB system database that are going to be key for administering log shipping. We're going to look at those on all three possible server types. So let's look at log shipping from a kind of a bird's eye view starting off. What is log shipping all about? First of all, it allows you to automatically send your transaction log backups from a primary database on a primary server to one or to multiple secondary databases. So that's the automatic portion of this. It doesn't do automatic failover, but it is automatically moving your backup files to some other location where they are hopefully more secure. Now in my scenario, we're going to actually back up our log files to our secondary server. So that's not necessarily the automatic portion from log shipping, that's just a standard backup. But then log shipping takes over, grabs that file and moves it to some other location. You don't have to have multiple servers for that. In my case, I don't. So my backup is happening to my secondary, and then the copy is also just from one folder on my secondary to another. And that's fine. Next, log shipping supports an optional third server as well, known as a monitor, which can help you track how is my log shipping going, what kind of errors am I seeing, when was the last time files got shipped. That kind of information can be available on a third server. Fourth, log shipping consists of basically three operations. You back up your transaction logs to some centrally available location. You then copy those transaction logs to your secondary server, or possibly just to a second folder within your secondary server. And then third, you restore those log backups onto the secondary server instance's copy of your database. So those are the automatic things that are involved with log shipping. You can actually ship to multiple secondary servers, or turn that around. You can have one secondary receiving files for multiple primaries as well. So you don't have to have a secondary server for every single primary server. Chances are you won't have multiple primaries die all at once, or let's say you've got 5 or 6 primaries, you could possibly have 2 secondaries and not likely to have more than 2 die at once. You can also do that. But once again, there's no automatic failover with log shipping. Switching from being a secondary server to a primary server is a manual process. And you can use your secondary database for reporting purposes. It actually has all the data, so you can use it to run reports. And then last, you can configure alerts for your log shipping configuration, and you have a few different choices of who manages and sends those alerts. If you have a monitor in place, it'll take care of that. If you don't have a monitor, there's actually a table, and we'll look at some of the tables in the primary as well as in the secondary that'll help manage those alerts. If you want to run SQL Server 2008 log shipping, you'll need to be in one of 4 different editions of SQL Server. There's the Enterprise, Standard, the Workgroup, or the Web edition. Any one of those 4 will support log shipping. So when we talk about log shipping, we're talking about possibly up to 3 servers. First of all, we have our primary server. The primary server is where your primary database, your production database, is going to be housed. That's the database you want to copy. You're going to be copying that to some secondary server. And this diagram is a little misleading because you don't necessarily copy that directly to the secondary server, but logically that's ultimately what happens. And then third, you could possibly have an optional monitor server that's tracking what's going on at the primary, what's going on at the secondary, how are we doing as far as getting the files from the primary to the secondary, how are we doing as far as applying those files once they're at the secondary. So once again, running through these, the primary is where you're going to hold your database. That's your primary production database. All the administration of your log shipping configuration, when you're doing it through the Management Studio, that's going to happen at your primary database. Your primary database needs to be in either full or bulk logged recovery. You won't be able to use simple, which makes sense. We're shipping logs and you don't have any log files if you're using the simple recovery model. If you were to switch your database from bulk or from full into the simple recovery model, your log shipping would obviously stop functioning because there would be no more logs to ship. Again, your secondary server is where you're ultimately going to apply those shipped logs. You're basically keeping a warm standby, and that it's not totally cold, it's not totally dead, and you're moving files over at some predetermined interval and applying those. So it shouldn't be more than whatever that interval is behind. If it's a 10-minute, 15-minute, half-hour interval for shipping, that should be the interval of the gap between your primary and your secondary. Now, one other thing to note, in my particular diagram here, I have a single primary server, a single secondary server, and like I said, an optional monitor. But we're not going to deal with the monitor too much right now because it is optional. What if I have multiple production databases that I want to back up and protect via log shipping? I could actually use one secondary or one additional server as the secondary for multiple primaries. All I have to do is maintain separate databases for each one of those primary databases on my secondary. Ship those files to some location, whether it be directly to the secondary server or some other third location, and then apply those. Now, if you're going to do that, you want to realize that, it's not very likely multiple primary servers are going to go down at the same time, but depending on your level of risk that you're willing to take on, you might want to consider planning for that, be it via maybe breaking them into multiple secondaries or just bumping up the size of that secondary server. At a minimum, Microsoft recommends that if you have more than one primary database being shipped to a secondary, that secondary should be bumped up a little bit to account for the fact that it could possibly have to support more than one database simultaneously. And then going back to the monitor one more time, the monitor is basically all about tracking. So when the transaction log on the primary was last backed up, the monitor wants to know about that. When the secondary servers last copied files onto the secondary from wherever location you're shipping those files, the monitor wants to know about that and tracks that. And then when you actually restore those files on the secondary, the monitor is also tracking that. And then also any type of alerts you have firing, the monitor is also going to be on top of that and tracking that as well. So here, one more time through this. Your primary server and your primary database is your production. It's going to host your primary database. All your administration of your log shipping happens on the primary. You must use full or bulk logged recovery because, once again, the simple recovery model doesn't even produce log files, so there would be nothing to ship. Your secondary server and or database or bases. This is a warm copy. I like that term, warm, as opposed to completely dead cold, turn it on. It's already up and running. You may just need to apply a final transaction log before it's ready to go. And it can contain backup copies from not just one, but multiple primary servers. You will need to initialize it first by restoring a full backup from the primary. And then your monitor, which is optional. This is going to track all of the details of log shipping, such as, when was the last time the transaction log on the primary was backed up? When was the last time the secondary copied and restored those files? And then information about any backup failure alerts. Another note about the monitor, it should be on a separate server from the primary or the secondary if you're going to have a monitor. And then last but not least, a single monitor can serve multiple log shipping configurations, so you're not required to have a one-to-one correlation with the monitor either. Next, I want to talk to you about log shipping jobs. There are basically four. You've got your backup, your copy, your restore, and your alert. But starting with the backup, the primary database is backing up files to some location, and I just took and drew an arrow into like nowhere land for now, just to emphasize the fact that it doesn't need to be on the secondary server. In my particular case here, I'm going to put everything on the secondary server simply because I'm not in a real production environment. Veronica would love for me to really build this out for her and start the business tomorrow. But for now, I'm doing this in this environment for Veronica's, right? So those files could be anywhere, at a third server, some file share somewhere. But the point is, you've backed it up to some location that the primary has access to and the secondary has access to those files, so it can then copy those files. Now, both of these tasks, as well as the other two we're going to mention, I just want to re-emphasize this point, are being initialized, driven by the SQL Server agent. That's the SQL Server process that's driving any automatic tasks that's happening in your SQL Server environment. So initiating the backups at your regular scheduled intervals, initiating the copy at your regular scheduled intervals, as well as the actual restore. So once you've done all three of these, your two databases should be in sync. And then it's just simply, as it says, rinse, lather, and repeat. You just kind of do this over and over again. You're going to do another backup at your next scheduled interval, copy that file over to the secondary, and then restore. And then the fourth job is your alert. Now, your alert can fire in various places. So, for example, if you're not using a monitor, backups are handled by the primary, restores are handled by the secondary, and the alerts will fire in those locations. Backup alert will fire over on the primary. Your restore failed alert will fire over on the secondary. If you choose to use a monitor, however, all of your alerts fire on the monitor, and that's even if this monitor is being used to monitor multiple primary-secondary pairs. That means if you change the alert for one pair, primary-secondary pair, you've changed it for all. Okay? Which could be great. You're monitoring everything and adjusting everything from one central location, but if you need to be able to finely tune that and have alerts firing for some primary-secondary pairs and not for others, then you'll want to either not have a monitor or have separate monitors. So I've talked at you long enough. So what we're going to do now is move over to my server environment. I'm using two servers, a primary server and a secondary server. And I also have a third server that I'm using as a domain controller. All three servers are part of the same domain. And I've configured security to allow my primary server to have read-write access to my secondary server, because I'm going to actually back up my primary directly to my secondary server and then have it copy that file from that folder to the folder that it uses as part of the log shipping. But here, let's jump over to the server. So here we are on my primary server for Veronica's, and we're going to put log shipping in place. Now, the first thing I need to do is define a place where the logs can be shipped to. you can, well, first of all, you definitely want them off the primary server. That's the whole point, is to have a backup somewhere else in case you need it. But you could put them on a third server, which is probably your best bet. That's the actual Microsoft recommendation. Or you could just put them on the secondary server where you're going to have the secondary database installed as well. To minimize the amount of servers we need for this demo, I'm going to put them on my secondary server for now, but you could create a share anywhere and ship those logs anywhere. But here, my primary server is going to be this wonderful shade of blue. Hopefully you can see that. My secondary server is going to be this very boring white, but hopefully that'll help you to keep track of which server we're on. Now on this server, my secondary server, let's go to Start, and I'm just going to create a share under my SQL Server folder. Now where you put it, of course, is really just based on wherever you need to put it to keep track of things. But I'm going to create a new folder here. New folder, log shipping, and just for readability, I like a capital S. Log shipping sent. Log shipping received. So I've got my two folders. Log shipping sent. Now once again, I'm putting this on my secondary server for now. That is where I'm going to back up my primary backups from my primary database. I'm going to put them there. Then my secondary server will pull from the received. The log shipping operation will move the files from the sent to the received, no matter where they are. It just so happens to be there on the same server, and then restore that backup to my secondary server. So I want to share these folders possibly. I don't have to. I could use a fully qualified name. I'll just go ahead and do that. So here, let's grab that name. Now that I have those in place, let's move back over to my primary server and set it up to use those locations. Start. Bring up Management Studio, logging into my local server. Database, Veronica's, right click, go to Tasks, Ship Transaction Logs. Enable this as a primary database and a log shipping configuration. So I click here. Backup settings, it defaults to every 15 minutes, once a day, and that's good enough. What it doesn't give me by default is a location, so I want to put that in. Network path to backup folder, and that's going to be on my other server, Win08-SQL08, and that server is simply 01, and log shipping sent. That's where I'm going to send them to. With that done, I could modify the schedule some more, but like I said, the default of every 15 minutes is good for us for now. Click OK. Secondary server instance, where this stuff is going to go. Where am I sending it? Click Add. Connect. And I'm connecting to my secondary server, which is the same name, -01. Click Connect. So now I'm looking at my secondary server. If there's a database there already named Veronica's, it'll use it. If not, it will create it. Go to Restore Options. Folder for the data files. If the secondary database will be created when the backup is restored, you can specify the folders in which the log and data files will be created. I'm going to go with the default locations for that, so I don't need to change that. If I go to Copy Files, where is log shipping going to ship the logs to? Log shipping received. That's where I want to ship my logs to. How long do I want them to stay around? After 72 hours, don't need them anymore. Schedule's already set up as every 15 minutes. That's perfect for now. What state do I want the database to be in after each application of those logs? Do I want to leave it in no recovery mode or standby mode? We're going to go with the default of no recovery mode. So with that, click OK. Click OK again. All right, backing up primary database died, and I'm 99% sure I know why. I created a folder on the other server, but I did not share that, so it can't access that folder. So I need to go back and do that. So I could just not tell you that, but I'm going to assume you will probably make some of the same mistakes. So let's just go over to the other server. I created these folders, but I never gave the other server access. Right click, share, advanced sharing, share this folder. I'll just give it full control for all for now. There. And I'm going to share the second one as well. Close this out. Move back over to my server. And let's run through that again. Ship logs, enable, backup settings, same path. Win08-SQL 08-01. Received. So my backups will actually get shipped to that location. And I do need a slash right there, a backslash. Looks good. Default schedule is just fine. Not going to change that. So click OK. Now I want to add my secondary server. Go ahead and click Add again. Connect to my secondary server. Copy files. Now here's where I need to put that location in again that's now shared. Win08-SQL 08. That option, location, restore to no recovery. So with those things in place, click OK. Click OK again. And log shipping is looking good. Let's close this out. We can move over to the other server and just look at that location. See if we see a file there. Program files, SQL Server. And there's my backup file, 11:14, which is the current time. Looks good. One other thing, let's go to the SQL log shipping monitor. If I right click on my primary server, the instance here, in Object Explorer, if I go to reports, standard reports, the very last one on the list will say transaction log, shipping status. Clicking on that, I can see how my log shipping's doing. It gives it a few seconds to run. Looks like my last backup was a minute ago. That looks good. Let's go over to the secondary server and see what it says. Start. Bring up SQL Management Studio again. Log in locally. Right click, go to reports. Standard report, transaction log shipping status on the other end says looks like my restore has been applied. If I right click, go to databases, there's Veronica's being restored. So it's clicking along. So that's log shipping. Now once again, there's a few other options you can add on to this. You can choose different locations. It's probably not what you want to do in a production environment to have all of your files here on the secondary server like I've done. But maybe, depends. The primary thing is to make sure you don't have them on the primary server. You definitely want to have them off of the primary server. So with that, we've set up log shipping. So let's do a recap, just summarizing with the basic steps for your log shipping setup. First of all, you choose your servers, your primary server, which is basically your production server, your production database, and you choose your secondary server. Now, I probably could have said choose your primary servers. You could have multiple servers, multiple primary servers that are log shipping to one secondary server, right? But the other thing you'll have to do is make sure to decide or get authorization to not have or to have an optional monitor server. That's another thing you can throw in there as a third box that's monitoring the process. Now, in our case, we didn't go with a monitor server, but you could do that. Second, you want to create a file share for your transaction log files. So you need to have some centrally available location where you're placing those log files every time you perform the backup. Now, in our case, I just dumped them on my secondary server. You can do that. The main thing to note is make sure you're not putting them right back onto the primary server, because that's the one you want to be able to have fault tolerance in case it crashes, right? Don't back up to the primary box. Back up somewhere else. So in my case, like I said, once again, I just put them on the secondary box, and then it may have been a little confusing because we did it all on the same secondary server. For the shipping portion of log shipping, in my case, there was really no shipping required because it was already on the secondary server. So all the process needed to do was copy it from one folder on the secondary to another folder, but that's fine. Third, choose a backup schedule for your primary database. I went with the default setting, which was every 15 minutes throughout the day. Depending on your database, that could be just fine. Might be way too frequent based on your database, maybe not frequent enough based on your business needs, but you'll need to make that determination and set that up based on what works for you. 4, create a folder on each secondary server into which the transaction log files will be shipped or copied. So once again, in my case, there were really just 2 folders under a subfolder, and that's fine for this case, and for the amount of data we're working with the Veronica's, it's just fine. 5th, configure one or more secondary databases. So in step 1, I told you to configure your primary and secondary servers as well as an optional monitor server. But then on that secondary server, you create your database or databases. It's possible to have multiple primary production databases all log shipping to a single secondary server. That's fine so long as they have multiple databases. And actually I have on here secondary servers. It's really secondary databases on a secondary server. You could have multiple secondary servers, so there's lots of different configurations, but really for point number 5 here, specifically I'm saying configure one or more secondary databases on your server. 6, once again, that optional monitor server, if you choose to have one, go ahead and configure that. So log shipping is up and running. And now I need to actually use the logs that have been shipped. Let's look at flipping the role of those 2 servers, turning my secondary into my primary server. How do I bring that secondary server up and into production? So let's move over to the servers and do that. So I've got my log shipping up and running, and everything's going smooth. And now we've decided we need to upgrade our primary server dramatically at Veronica's. And we actually planned for a slightly more powerful secondary. And we've decided we want to make our secondary our new primary for now and make our primary the secondary. So switch the roles and then maybe later on upgrade the secondary as well. So how do I do that? Well, that's called failover. It's a manual process. And that's a clean, easy failover because nothing died yet. Had my primary database died, which is another reason why we do log shipping, right, to protect in case the primary dies. Had it died, things would be a little different. I wouldn't have access necessarily to the final tail of the transaction log. But for now, let's assume everything's up and running and I just want to switch to 2. The first thing I'm going to do is go to my SQL Server agent. That's the SQL Server process, or the engine, so to speak. Use that term loosely because there's another term that we call the engine, but that's the component that actually drives log shipping. If I expand jobs, I eventually get down to ls backup _ Veronica's. Now we didn't look at this earlier, but if you double click it, notice the category is log shipping. This is the default name that was given to my log shipping job, and there it is. You can see that. Cancel out here for now, but I don't want this to run anymore. So if I right click, I can stop the job, or I can just disable the job. Now just disable it for now. So successful, no longer running. So once that's happened, I'm assured that no other copies are going to be happening, no other backups are going to be happening while I'm doing this process. Next, I want to take any remaining files and manually back them up and copy them over to my secondary server. Now that process isn't really any different than what you've done in other backups, so that'll be pretty familiar here. So let's see what I have over on my secondary server as far as transaction logs. I've been putting those directly over here under Program Files, SQL Server, MS SQL, and Logs Shipped. So here's my latest transaction log. So the process is still running. And I want to restore that here on my secondary. So here, let's do that. Transaction log restore. Now, there's the process of copying it from the location where it's been backed up to the location where you're normally restoring from, but in my case it's really all the same server, so it's not that big a deal. I can just directly go to that location. So from File or Tape, Backup Media as a File, click Add, and navigate to the Log Shipping Received folder. Grab that transaction log file, click OK. And now I can choose to, just like with any other backup, choose to leave it in the no recovery state or have it come up and be productive, have it be live. And I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now my secondary server is pretty much in sync. Now the one thing we didn't do, and this is across the board with any backup, since my primary database was actually healthy and probably processing transactions, just like with any other backup, you want to back up that tail, just like you do with a regular backup, and then restore the tail also. So the recovery I just now did, instead of doing a recovery, add that transaction log, get that tail log and apply it, just like with a standard backup, and then do your recovery after the tail. But in either case, that one extra step if need be, and then you still end up in the same spot where I've got my Veronica's is up and running and ready for business on my secondary server. Now one thing we didn't touch on here, but will be important, is you'll have to make sure you can redirect all of your clients, all your client applications to your secondary server. And you have a myriad of different ways you can go about doing that. You might want to develop your applications such that they automatically fail over if the primary server is no longer available. After a certain amount of time, they check for the secondary server. Is one way to do that. But that's something you'll want to do in addition to this step. But this is the main deal right here. You want to get that primary server offline, stop the process of shipping logs, apply those final transaction logs like we just did, and then bring this one up and have it live. The information for running log shipping is going to be housed in your MSDB system database. Anything with SQL Server that's automatic, whether it's automatic backups or any kind of automated jobs, are always driven based on information in the MSDB database, and log shipping is no different. Now when you're looking at log shipping, you've got specific tables associated with log shipping, and we're going to look at those, starting with the tables that are on the primary server. Log shipping monitor alert. This is going to store your alert job ID information. However, you will only have this table if you don't have a dedicated monitor server configured. If you have a dedicated monitor server configured, you won't get a log shipping monitor alert table on your primary server. Log shipping monitor error detail. Things go wrong sometimes, right? Where do you go to find out what's going on? The first line of defense will be your log shipping monitor error detail table. Log shipping monitor history detail. You want to go back and see, how have my logs and the shipping process been progressing? You have a history table that can give you that information. Then these next two tables, your log shipping monitor primary and log shipping primary databases, will contain one row per primary database. Now, looking at this next item, log shipping primary secondaries maps your primary databases to your secondary databases. That's important because this is not a fixed configuration where you always have one primary server with one primary database mapped to one secondary server with one secondary database. You can have a myriad of different configuration options. For example, you could have 5 primary servers, each with a single primary database, all mapped to a single secondary server with 5 separate secondary databases. You could have a single primary database. You could have a single primary server with multiple primary databases on that server mapped to one or more secondary servers. It depends upon how much data you're working with, your business needs, what is your tolerance for data loss. All of those things will be factored into determining what your mapping will be, and this table will actually document that mapping. Moving on to the secondary server tables. First of all, log shipping monitor alert. Just as with the primary, you'll only have this if you have not configured the optional monitor server. If you do not have an optional monitor server, you get a monitor alert table on your secondary server. Log shipping monitor error detail, just like with the primary. Error information will be here, one of your first lines of defense if you're finding problems with the log shipping. And then, of course, there's also the history information in the history table, followed by your log shipping monitor secondary and log shipping secondary. Both of these will have one line per secondary database associated with this secondary server. And then your log shipping secondary servers shows other configuration information for your secondary database. It will store one row per secondary database available on this server. And then your monitor server tables, as with the other two, that first table on the list and both of the other two goes away, and this table, log shipping monitor alert here, will actually store your alert job IDs. Log shipping monitor error details will be moved to this table in this database. Log shipping monitor history gets moved over here. Your log shipping monitor primary stores one monitor record per primary database associated with this monitor server. Log shipping monitor secondary stores your records for the secondary databases associated with this monitor. Well, that brings us to the end of this video. So what did we cover? We looked at log shipping setup, log shipping servers. There were basically three, right? The primary, the secondary, which are the two required ones, and you can have more than one of those as possible configurations, and then a possible optional monitor server. We looked at the different jobs that run as part of the log shipping process and how that's all driven by SQL Server Agent. There are key tables that are part of the log shipping configuration. We looked at those key tables and where they reside on the three different types of servers. And we looked at a failover. How do I switch the secondary server from being a secondary to being my primary server? So with that, that brings us to the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.